5 nights, 5 secrets, the truth they tried to bury. All this week at 8 p.m. on Narratives.
And because this is the truth about Jeffrey Epstein, we're going to be revealing over the next 5 nights. I'm really excited to welcome Alisa Valdes-Rodriguez back to the show. We had a great hour when we last chatted on Friday, but it's nice to see you again, Alisa. How are you, Alicia?
Oh, to see you too. How's it going?
I am so excited about tonight. Last week you shared this bit of information that I know someone in the comments section said, how come Zev doesn't know this? I try to read everything, but I don't know everything. And I didn't know that the FCC had still working microwave towers at the Zorro Ranch. And when you told me that, it was almost like a big, explosion went off in my head. I was like, oh, this really does, that's a missing piece. It's a tiny little piece, but it's actually a huge piece. When you think about how it helps us validate what Jeffrey Epstein was really doing in New Mexico. I mean, we know he was there because there were girls and all that other stuff, but really New Mexico is a strange place to choose to go and set up shop unless you had a reason to, because as you pointed out last week, there's only a few reasons to be in New Mexico. And the nuclear labs that they have there are the 2 significant reasons. But even still, maybe that's just coincidence that those 2 things just happen to be there in Zorro. But then you revealed the microwave. And let's explain to people what this microwave is. I mean, microwaves are not your typical, they're not what they call those things that Elon Musk makes as dishes.
Starlink.
Yeah. It's not Starlink. It's a really big, sophisticated, large honking piece of machinery. And I've worked in television where they use microwaves as well. And military facilities are even more protected and more built up. And they're designed to pinpoint a beam of data directly at a receiving point, and only at that receiving point. Go ahead.
He had 5 licenses until, and they were still active after his death. And you could say maybe they were just letting the clock run out on these things, but they also cost money to maintain. And then the new owners buy the ranch in 2023. Epstein dies in 2019. And then 2023, the new owners come in and they terminate 3 of the 5 FCC licenses that the ranch has, but they keep 2 of them. And it is a bi-directional system. So one of them transmits from the ranch to the top of Sandia Crest. The Sandia Mountains are these huge mountains that flank Albuquerque on the east side. His ranch is on the other side of those mountains, okay? And at the very top, it's nothing but radio towers and sniping and Osteria and stuff. And he had his own tower up. And the documents that I found in the actual DOJ file that are emailed back and forth between his ranch manager and a ranch manager at the ranch next door, which is owned by Henry Singleton's estate and his heirs, and he's the guy who started Teledyne, one of the biggest defense contractors in the world.
Right.
But I don't think the San Cristobal Henry Singleton Ranch eventually agreed to do that. So he does it on his own. And the contractor who's helping him set it up says, his own words, that this is a military industrial grade system and very expensive.
So why would anyone need such a thing? I mean, why would you need a military industrial microwave that was pointing directly at a nuclear lab? I mean,
well, there's a lot of things out here are named Sandia, watermelon in Spanish. When Spaniards came, they saw this mountain range that turns very red, pink at sunset, so they called them the Sandia. But Sandia Peak is the top of the mountain range where you have a lot of different transmission towers for TV and radio.
So you could have used it to transmit to a bunch of places. And when you've got line of sight with one microwave, then you can use that microwave to distribute to other microwaves. It's all line of sight. You actually have to see the receiving antenna, and then you can push it to other directions. And do you know if he was using it mostly to transmit or to receive?
Well, he had a license for both, and they're still active. That's what's really interesting about this. There are new owners, right? They've renamed it San Rafael Ranch. It's Donald and Mary Catherine Huffines, or Huffin. I don't know Huffin is how they pronounce it. They are millionaires from Texas, MAGA. Donald Huffine right now is endorsed by Donald Trump, and he's running to be the next Texas state comptroller. Their son, they have many sons.
So one way to describe him.
Well, he's in the Trump cabinet right now. Cabinet, yes, Russell Huffine. I can get his exact title, but he is in Trump's cabinet. He's young. He manages something in the cabinet, the Office of Cabinet Affairs or something.
That's a very significant office, actually. We should find out the exact title. When you mentioned Sandia, and I had the same reaction I think you did when you found out about it years ago. I just found out about it this weekend. You mentioned Sandia, and I thought, well, I remember that name from the Robert Maxwell investigation years ago that I did, because Robert Maxwell also wanted to spy on Sandia using Promise software and this company, which we'll tell you about in just a second. Now, that is just interesting and not a coincidence. It's not a coincidence.
Ghislaine later says that she's the one who brings Jeffrey Epstein to New Mexico, and he falls in love.
Right. And Ghislaine Maxwell, of course, Robert Maxwell's daughter. And so the idea that both Robert Maxwell and Jeffrey Epstein would be interested in that whole Los Alamos, New Mexico industry of nuclear scientists and labs is really important, because the thing that people seem to forget about Epstein and Maxwell and Robert Maxwell particularly, is that they were all spies. And I'll go through a bunch of incidents that happened in America all the way since 1945 onwards, which sort of proved that, Israel was so interested in these nuclear weapons, but interested on behalf of the Russians as well. And so when you get someone like Robert Maxwell, who comes out of, in 1945 and out of the Second World War, his first assignment is to track the German nuclear scientists. And that's his first assignment right out of the war. And he continues that assignment really all his life. He never really stops in pursuing the nuclear scientists. In the 50s, he bought a press called Pergamon Press, which was a publishing house that published Soviet nuclear scientific research. But my point really is that Robert Maxwell's key interest in this whole world of nuclear weapons was because there was a nuclear arms race between America and Russia, and there was mutual deterrence. And so this one side had an advantage over the other side, it would be significant. And that's why they would want as much data and knowledge and scientific basis. But then they'd also want to acquire these scientists as spies. Because what Pergamon Press, for example, did, it would invite people to publish in the press, and then slowly over time, try to convince them to share secrets, become have more involved assets with sharing information back and forth. And this became a big thing, which ultimately was investigated by the FBI. We'll show you in just a few minutes. But then we get to this case of Sandia, where you know the story really well. What happened when they discovered that there was a company owned by, I can't remember her name, someone in Ruga, I think, is in Ruga or something. And she had a way into the databases of these government institutions, particularly Sandia.
I just know there are 3 whistleblowers at Sandia who tell the FBI that they believe the software they purchased from Robert Maxwell was bugged, backdoor.
Oh, this is a promise. Okay, so this might be a separate incident. I thought it might be a separate incident. Well, why don't you talk about that first? So
the whistleblowers reported, and the Justice Department says, cool, and then they shut it down.
And it's significant.
It's significant. So what I believe is happening, I do know that Israel did trade some secrets they got from U.S. military with the Soviet Union for the release of some Jewish nuclear scientists who were living in the Soviet Union, and they wanted them in Israel. They got that. But I do think there is also CIA involvement in this. I think it's really hard for Americans, especially, to acknowledge that their own country or their own CIA sometimes has done things that would make them uncomfortable. But I do think the U.S. was okay. U.S. intelligence has to have been okay with what Robert Maxwell was doing and what Israel was doing at the labs. And my hypothesis on that is that there were non-proliferation treaties, and it would have been a breaking of that treaty to share secrets with Israel. And so, but you could look the other way while Israel acquired them on their own. And I think that's what was going on here in New Mexico. I think Jeffrey Epstein was part of it.
I think that's a very, very good way of putting it, because the Promise software was taken by two Israelis named Rafi Eitan and Ari Ben Menashe. And these two Israeli spies, they were working for the Israeli military intelligence at the time. Supposedly they stole the software, but they didn't really steal it. They arrived at the Department of Justice and someone gave it to them. For many years, only Rafi Eitan's name was revealed that was the person who stole it. And then I asked, and I'm generating the audio right now, but I asked Ari Ben Menashe in an interview I did with him a while ago, whether he was the second person involved in getting that Promise software. And this is what he said to me about Promise in general, but let's take it as just a short clip. Why does Israel feel like it has a unique, like Promise, for example, the software Promise?
We were the ones that faded it to him and he gave it to the Russians.
And sold it to everybody else around the world?
Yeah, but the Russians was headquartered. France. Promises already outdated.
Yeah. This extraordinary brave act of Rafi and whoever it was to go and get this undercover and then to give it to Maxwell. Why did you give it to Maxwell?
So he'd sell it to the Russians. Remember the flight they planned it in Red Square? German boy that planned it.
We all need to bear in mind that all of these intelligence organizations love to blame shift.
Yeah.
A half-truth is better than a straight lie, too. I'm not saying that's what happened in your interview.
Oh, no, there's definite obfuscation.
Even within the communications themselves, there's a lot of Russian intelligence trying to make it look like it was Israel doing it, Israel trying to make it look like it was Russia doing it. This is part of what they do. And I would imagine even some people who are entangled in the whole thing and working for various different ones of these organizations at the same time, it can be very hard to know who's doing it and for what reason.
Yeah, what we do know is that the Israelis and the Russians cooperated on a lot of nuclear activity during the 50s all the way through onwards. I mean, there's various cases that have sprung up in our history where Israelis have been caught spying. Here's just a few of them, in various forms on American facilities. And let me just get rid of this banner here so we can see it. There's the 1985 Pollard espionage case, which everyone remembers, where this guy was spying on U.S. nuclear submarine developments. That was sending that back to Israel, and then Israel sold it to the Russians. The Promise theft we've already described here. Then there's also the era around Robert Maxwell, which we know involved the Sandia incidences. Actually, I think 2 Sandia incidences. We're talking about it now. And then
Alamos, too.
And then you've got the incident involving Benjamin Netanyahu, the current prime minister of Israel, who, with Arnon Milken, the director and producer of Pretty Woman, who is a known Israeli agent, were stealing these nuclear propellers, or stealing is the wrong word, but we're smuggling nuclear propellers out of the United States to Israel. Again, I think you're right to say that this was part of a wink, wink, it's okay, we know you're doing this, and that these propellers landed up in Dimona, which is a nuclear facility in Israel. It was probably acknowledged, along with Promise and all these other things. We know you're doing this.
It's Edwin Meese who shut it down, the Department of Justice, and Ronald Reagan era. Keep in mind, the man. Okay, so Zorro Ranch is sold to Jeffrey Epstein by the then sitting governor of New Mexico, who introduces him to the guy who's his POA. We'll get to that in a minute. But the ranch next door, there's several because it's a big ranch, but 2+ miles of fence line of Zorro Ranch are shared with Henry Singleton, San Cristobal Ranch. Henry Singleton is not just the founder of Teledyne. He hold joint power of attorney over. He is a trustee of Ronald Reagan's blind trust.
Really?
Yes.
Oh, that's so interesting.
His neighbor. Right. And it's so sitting governor on one side, and then the next big ranch next to it is Henry Singleton, who is in control at that moment of Ronald Reagan, the president, personal finance.
Very unusual.
Also unusual is that Jeffrey Epstein in his contact list has the modem number for Henry Singleton's ranch.
And Teledyne is a very well-known company. I mean, it comes up again and again in all the research we've done on Epstein.
Teledyne had trouble just a couple of years after that, knowingly selling components that were non-functional to Sandia.
What was the purpose behind that? Selling them non-function.
Who are these people working for? Like, you look at it and on the surface, they look like they're patriotic Americans and they're doing this, that, and the other. But then, like, why is his company knowingly selling flawed devices, components? And they have to pay a massive fine for that at the time. And then they move right along. And he goes on to become, one of the most lauded businessmen in American history. He becomes the largest landowner in New Mexico.
Because those are all the tactics that the Epstein network was using, whether it's financial networks or he's doing the same short selling or basically everything else we've been describing. But it's sort of what you're saying here is, and what I'm trying to underline as well, is that there is a real interest in this Maxwell Epstein, let's call it a dynasty. I don't know what else to call it, whatever, something else is a better word for it, I'm sure. But the Epstein really became the heir apparent of the Robert Maxwell operation. And this is not something I'm speculating about. This is something that I've been told by people who know this kind of stuff, by people who are close to Epstein, that this was an arrangement in order to continue, well, it's not continue, but maybe get into the next act. If this was a 3-act play, Maxwell might be the first act, Epstein was the second act. And in that second act, they would move the operation to America and really be stationed in America compared to where Maxwell spent most of the time in the UK. But it would be a slightly different operation, wouldn't be the same operation, but they would still be spying on nuclear scientists, particularly in Epstein's case, surrounding himself with a network of nuclear scientists.
Yeah. He was very clear that that was what interested him here. There's an organization called the Santa Fe Institute, which is, I would go to lectures at the Santa Fe Institute. It's just a place where idea people come and they talk, intellectual, the big, but it was started by scientists who were on the Manhattan Project from Los Alamos National Labs. The Manhattan Project and the first atomic bomb ever created, those all happened here in New Mexico. The labs do not disappear after that. They expand. They are still to this day one of the biggest, economic generators in our state. And a lot of those scientists, either the ones who were working there or ones who left, were associated with the Santa Fe Institute. Robert Maxwell, before Jeffrey Epstein even comes out here, Robert Maxwell endows a chair at the Santa Fe Institute in his name for $300,000. And then his daughter brings Jeffrey out here, coincidentally finds him a ranch that is roughly equidistant between Los Alamos Labs and Sandia Lab. And then Epstein starts to court and woo all of the Santa Fe Institute scientists, many of whom have really, great ideas, and they can't find funding for their own pet projects that are not military based. And so who steps in to solve that problem for them?
Jeffrey Epstein.
The rich, weird, eccentric Wall Street guy, right?
But it's exactly the same thing Robert Maxwell did. Back in the Argonne days, he would go and he would acquire the papers. He would become the publisher of a lot of these American scientific papers. And that's how he would land up getting in contact with these scientists. He'd lure them into whatever arrangement he needed to lure them. But mostly it would be about funding their own projects. And they'd be loved to have their own projects funded. That was also a gateway for all that stuff to get to Israel, to Russia, to whomever was, in Maxwell's case, it really was Russia that was the first port of call. In Epstein's case, I'm not sure who he was more loyal to, but certainly worked for both. And then there's this interesting thing that Epstein shows up in the nuclear facility that is just similar to Los Alamos in Russia in I'm not sure the exact year, maybe 1987, maybe 97, I'm not sure. But it's interesting that despite every travel ban you can imagine, Jeffrey Epstein goes with Esther Dyson and gets access to this really secretive nuclear facility. And there's a photograph of him taken outside that facility at a time when really it wasn't, there weren't a lot of Americans traveling to Russia at all. And yet he got access to this very high security facility. That's very unusual.
Very unusual. The whole thing is unusual. This is weird.
When they say the simplest explanation for all these things is these guys were spies and they were trying to get nuclear secrets, their countries, they could sell them. Well, even if they weren't spies themselves, you get this, if you want to soften that argument, then they were brokering this information to intelligence agencies around the world that were gathering this information.
I don't think Jeffrey Epstein gave a crap about anything other than being a pedophile. I think he was singularly obsessed with it. That was important to him. And I think whoever located him from the beginning or recruited him saw that this was, you have the dark triad personality, and someone like Donald Trump explodes in rage, right? So that's the sociopath, but then kind of narcissistic rage, or malignant narcissistic sociopath, maybe. Epstein is more psychopathic. I don't think he ever blew up in a rage. So this is a guy who can stay calm but as long as you give him what he wants, which is an endless supply of children to rape, he will do whatever you want. This is not a man with a conscience. So I don't think he was particularly interested in acquiring secrets from anybody and giving them to anybody else. I think he was extraordinarily interested in children. And he was charming. He was handsome. He was able to fulfill a role really well and be rewarded for it. He wasn't just, doing honey traps and compromise, organizing, men to rape children. He was actively involved in it, as was his partner in crime.
Absolutely. I don't know if you would say, he was a financial and mathematical, some people say genius, but whatever way you look at it, he was an architect of some really interesting financial instruments. He was look at some of his stuff around crypto.
That was a front. I think Warren was giving him money, and he was okay at some things. You read enough of his email, the man was not bright. We have this mythology of him as a smart guy. He was great at this. He was good at that. No, he actually wasn't. What he was really, really good at was being a psychopath who can manipulate people and rape kids and organize his entire life around that. But I don't think those scientific ideas, when you look at he was very good at faking it. Very good at faking it. Very good at acting like he knew stuff. But he didn't actually know stuff. That's my opinion. From reading.
I think it's a really valid opinion. I think he was a really good chameleon. He was probably a very, very good spy who was able to manage layers and layers of different types of personalities and different kinds of profiles that he would show people depending on what he was doing at the time. So he would have to hide himself a lot. But I think we have evidence of him being involved in financial crimes. We have evidence of him being involved in nuclear spying, and we have evidence of him being involved in compromising presidents. All those things are not easy to do.
But I'm saying I think his intrinsic motivation would not give somebody secrets or these financial crimes, other than feeling like an ego boost from it. I think the real motivating carrot that you dangle in front of Jeffrey Epstein is an endless supply of children, young women to rape and control and kidnap and traffic. That was, I think the big motivator for him.
Do you think he's Russian? It's so hard for me to, unless you agree that he was a Russian. Do you think he worked for the Russians at all? Do you think he worked for them?
I think a personality like Jeffrey Epstein works for whoever gives him what he wants at that moment. And I think initially, no, but perhaps later. If I start at the beginning, I'm going chronological. I'm looking at what happens in the 80s, what happens in the early 90s, who are the people involved with all of that? Where do those tentacles lead? And as time moves on, there's more of a Soviet presence in the 80s, in all of this. And actually even till now in New Mexico. And it's alarming. It's actually terrifying to me.
What do you mean by New Mexico there's an alarming Soviet presence or a Russian presence? What does it mean?
Well, right now, I'm starting to look at the different candidates we have because I like our current governor, Michelle Grisham. She's done a lot of really cool stuff here, but free universal childcare, free meals in schools for all kids, regardless of your family income, things like that. But I'm kind of sad that she's going away, and we have this group of people running, including a guy I went to middle school with. It's a small state, named Doug Turner. And Doug Turner, after middle school, and I only know this because I thought I wanted to go there too. There's a private residential high school, private prep school here, a United World College. They're all over the world. They're these super fancy schools. Mm-hmm. They were founded by Armand Hammer. If you know who Armand Hammer was, he was a Soviet spy. I did know that the Armand Hammer school looked like Hogwarts, it was like this magical place in the mountains, and I wanted to go there. I applied to go. They only accept 2 people from every country to go to high school there. And Doug also applied, right? This kid I went, and he got accepted. I didn't. And he then goes on to do a bunch of other things and whatever. He's running as a Republican here. But I can't find any information on his parents at all. I don't know how he ended up in New Mexico. He and his brother, I'm just starting to look into it. But that family appears to have some ties to some things that you might be interested in.
It wouldn't surprise me. I mean, there's a lot of people think of the 1980s. I even remember this era of the spy versus spy was actually a really serious thing. I mean, the intelligence world was how we got information and how we stayed ahead of the Russians and how we knew what was going on behind the Iron Curtain. I mean, it was really the bread and butter of foreign affairs. And it was really important work that both sides were doing for each of their countries. And so, those people didn't disappear. Those people, a lot of them, if you see the series, The Americans, where you had these Russian spies embedded in ordinary suburban life, and then, many years later became more active spies, but were sort of, running behind cover as American married couple. Did you see that series?
No.
It reminds me a lot of the same kind of environment, the same kind of vibe that you would have, if you think about everything in your family, having a shielded piece of it that is, hey, we know inside the family that we're working for the Russians. But this is generational now. But outside to the world, you're just this ordinary American family with, a
ton of that here for everybody you can think of. But more, I have a harder time believing that me and the CIA would quietly look the other way if it was the Soviets alone stealing,
I think the Israelis could steal it on their behalf.
Under Israel at that moment, I wouldn't feel particularly trusting of anybody. So, I don't know that I would put a lot of confidence in the United States, given the United States history, given that, Adolf Hitler himself said he was modeling what he did after, the slavery of the United States, the ethnic cleansing of the United States. The Native Americans. It's always amazing to me when people are like, well, hey, this person's like Hitler. Hitler's like a lot of people who were in the U.S. before. We don't love to talk about that here because history is told by the victors. My family is Puebloan on one side in New Mexico with roots 20,000 years deep here in New Mexico. This is not unknown to us what the U.S. is capable of. Yeah. So I don't think any country should be entirely trusting of the United States or the Soviet Union in that era. I would imagine if I were Israel and I wanted to be self-protective, I would be very careful about maneuvering in the Cold War between these two enormous superpowers who either one could annihilate anybody they wanted to at any moment.
Yeah, I think it's exactly right. I think they landed up having interests with both sides, and both sides were interested in them. And, America is finding out now that, hey, maybe they weren't as loyal to them as they thought they were, to America as they thought they were. But that's also, as you point out, exactly what you would do in a situation where you're a tiny little country just looking for, to survive. I want to get to the John Kelly papers, and I want to do a bunch of things. This is basically a comparison on the left-hand side of what we know about Robert Maxwell from the FBI files, and on the right, what we know about about what Epstein has been doing. And what you see here is on the left-hand side, Robert Maxwell was classified in internal security by the FBI as Russian or GE, which was East German. Those were the official codes. So he was already referenced as a Russian or East German asset. He had this Pergamon Press, he had the Nuclear Energy, the Junior Journal of Nuclear Energy Recruitment Vehicle, which was something that he published in America, which would allow him to recruit these scientists. He recruited from the Argonne National Lab, and that's nearby you too, isn't that? And the American Nuclear Society Publishing Control Attempt. He had key staff that were involved in a UK nuclear facility. There was a Soviet copyright deal for all their nuclear facilities. He was allowed to travel to the Soviet Union when others were not. He had 6 annual trips to the USSR for the journal. And this is why the FBI placed a lookout for him that was permanent for, anytime he traveled into the United States, et cetera. And then, of course, there's the Pergamon Sandia investigation. And then you've got the same kind of idea happening in the world of Jeffrey Epstein. We know some people said he belonged to intelligence. He had a cover story of being a private financier, but then he also had these evolutionary dynamics and carbine investments. He recruited Los Alamos, MIT, and Harvard scientists, and he had the Santa Fe Institute chair, which you've mentioned already. And we know that there have been investigations that have been opened and shut many, many times. Also, interestingly enough, he was able to travel he had a visa to travel to Russia for 16 consecutive years, including one of them sponsored by the FSB, essentially. He's also obviously connected to the Russian intelligence services. And then that's sort of the comparison. And when you see those two things, and there's your story about the microwave links, when you see those two comparisons, it does make you feel like they're operating in a similar kind of way, looking at the similar kind of scientific and science acquisition, and especially in this nuclear space.
Well, but Israel secretly developing its own nuclear bombs at the same time.
We just know that he was involved. These Russian ties exist on both sides, and Israel ties exist on both sides. So it's hard to tell, but we know that there is a history of the Israelis selling these secrets to the Russians. Now, one of the most extraordinary things you've been able to discover is this John Kelly finding.
My head just starts to hurt when I hear his name now.
I'm sorry. But you discovered him. So tell us who John Kelly is, and tell us how he becomes such an important part of Jeffrey Epstein's Zorro, story.
I'm still looking into him, but I published a little bit about him. John Kelly, so when Jeffrey Epstein arrives here with Ghislaine Maxwell to buy a portion of Bruce King's ranch that he then later names Zorro Ranch, Bruce King, the sitting governor, and the father of the soon-to-be Attorney General, Gary King. Jeffrey Epstein goes back. He identifies the property, can buy it. He leaves to go wherever he goes, and he needs a personal power of attorney. That's somebody who can sign on your behalf legal documents as though they were you, to act as though they were you. You can have a full power of attorney where you control everything, or a limited power of attorney. And so John Kelly is an attorney working in Albuquerque. Bruce King introduces him to Jeffrey Epstein, and Jeffrey Epstein hires or signs a contract with John J. Kelly, the private attorney working in Albuquerque, to be the power of attorney of record on the purchase of Zorro Ranch, as well as on the negotiation and signing of additional land that he leases from the state of New Mexico around the ranch. So he buys 7,600 acres, but the property extends by a couple thousand more acres because he leases this land. And you're allowed to lease state land if you're a rancher to run cattle on it. Jeffrey Epstein didn't have any cows, but he said he did and started making arrangements to make it look like he did.
Need to lease more land. Do we have any idea?
We have the former land commissioner, I think her name's Stephanie Martina, I could be wrong, later in recent years has said it's her belief that he did that, now that we know what we know about him, to be completely insulated. So his ranch would be completely insulated from any
That makes a lot of sense. People couldn't see in if you had any of the, the girls over, or any of the, any other famous people around, that would be completely secluded.
Or if he had things he wanted to bury and have never found, he could put on that land instead of his own. So that if an investigation in, say, 2026 comes along and the state does a search, then they only do it of the property.
So you've got the search that was started on the 9th of March, has been halted. Is it being halted? It's not going on anymore?
It's done. They took 4 cadaver dogs. They walked around this massive property and only that property for a couple days. And from what I understand, I'm going to do a deeper dive on this, but people who are familiar with what it takes when you have cadaver dog and canines and you're actually looking for something on a place that vast, you need more than 4 dogs in 2 days. So that's where that is. But going back to John Kelly, he is...
I'm just so surprised by that. I'm so surprised that we haven't heard much more about that. And this is, you're saying there's additional land that wasn't searched?
Correct.
That was cattle land? Interesting.
Well, I mean, maybe they searched the state land that he leased, but that's not what they said. They said they searched the current ranch. So I need to double check.
Okay, we'll take us back to John Kelly then.
this is back in 1993. Epstein's somewhere else doing whatever he does. And here on the ground in New Mexico, an attorney named John J. Kelly acts as power of attorney for Jeffrey Epstein on purchasing the ranch and leasing this extra land from this. Sounds fine. He was introduced to him by, the governor, who thinks very highly of John Kelly.
And these are the papers that were filed. These are part of the FBI files. And these are, in various cases, some of these are like the purchasing and others are the power of attorney. So as you're talking, I'll just scroll through these. So
that would all be pretty normal. I mean, I don't know that I would you want to have your own independence, but this is a different world they inhabit. And he goes with John J. Kelly. 8 months after that same year, John J. Kelly is suddenly, well, by the way, John J. Kelly was also the head of the Democratic Party of New Mexico.
Oh, really? That's interesting.
And helped get, powerful Democrats elected here, including Gary King. So he's friendly with Gary King. He's done him a favor. And then 8 months later, after he helps Epstein buy Zorro Ranch, John J. Kelly is named the United States for the District of New Mexico under, I guess, 93, that would be under Bill Clinton. Right? Yeah.
And so he would be the person responsible for investigating any crimes that would have happened, or at least prosecuting any crimes that would have happened at Zorro.
He serves, I believe, until I would have to double check. But he serves what was Kelly's.
One particular thing that I find so interesting is that Ghislaine Maxwell is here, and she signs off on this as an uninvolved person or a disinterested person is the way they've described it here. Where sorry, go ahead.
And that she personally inspected the tract of land. Like, what qualifications does she have to be a land inspector?
The last is there she is, and I found it so amazing to have her on a document related to Jeffrey Epstein. There's actually so many of these things from 1993, 94. I mean, that is so early on in their supposed relationship.
She's the one who located Zorro. She's the one, in her own words, last year, she said she found the clay. Okay, so Kelly serves as U.S. Attorney for the District of Mexico from 1993 to 2000. And the first reports of abuse that are coming out of Zorro Ranch to the FBI are coming, I believe, 1996. So that is John Kelly time and the person who would probably, in a functional world, when the FBI, Maria Farmer reported that he believed that her sister, Epstein had stolen naked photos of her minor sister, Annie Farmer. Annie Farmer later says that she was sexually assaulted at Zorro Ranch in 1990. So all of this, and plus there are also reports coming into local cops and people. But for the purposes of
do you believe that John Kelly hid those investigations? Because we do know, you're right, that Annie Farmer and Maria Farmer were all these things.
Yeah, but I'm just going to say, he was the guy who, if the FBI thought it was worth investigating, they would send it to him. He never, in his entire tenure as U.S. attorney for this District of New Mexico, he never opened any kind of investigation into Jeffrey Epstein. When the files dropped, I'm the first person to report about the power of attorney. Nobody in the local press found that. Like, they didn't know. They did see that his name was in the file. So it goes that far. It's like, why is your name in the file? And this was in 2020. Jeffrey Epstein was dead already. And a local TV reporter asked John J. Kelly why his name was in the file. And his response was, you'll have to ask Mr. Epstein.
I also think it also said that he only met him once or something, and that wasn't true because he shows up in the files.
Well, maybe they met in person once. I mean, lawyers are very good at, he says, I met him once and he expressed some interest in buying some land. That's all he says. He doesn't say, I was his power of attorney on that sale. He never disclosed.
It's a very interesting, the idea that no investigation has succeeded to find anything on that ranch, and how every single one of them, including these investigations we're talking about in Sandia and other places, were all halted. I mean, they're all just being stopped. Sandia lasted a couple of months and was stopped. All these investigations into Robert Maxwell also lasted a couple of months, then stopped. Clearly he was a spy of some sort, or an operative of some sort. And they had intelligence and FBI agents following him everywhere. and sort of a proven crime was taking place, you would think. And yet no one ever charged him with anything. Maybe that was because he was close to George Bush. Maybe it's because there was many other reasons you could think of. But it's remarkable to me that no one has ever been charged in New Mexico related to anything that's happened in Zorro.
It's roughly the same area, size-wise, geographically, as Germany. But we only have 2 million people, a little over 2 million people. Most of those live in a couple of the bigger cities, and then the rest of it is empty land. Very rural, lots of ranching and farming, and a long history of corruption because, I think, in some ways, because of that being 3 times colonized, which we are. This was Native American lands, many different tribes for a very long time, tens of thousands of years. Then Spain comes in 1540, and for the next, however, 200 some years is absolutely freaking brutal here. It's the Spanish Inquisition. It's Catholicism and the Spanish Inquisition coming up against matriarchal societies that have been here for tens of thousands of years, and it was absolute chaos here. And then after that, the U.S. Well, no, after that, the nation state of Mexico arrives, and we're in Mexico for a couple dozen years. And then the U.S. comes, and we become a territory from 1848 to 1912. Then we become a state. And then, so you have this long history of people coming through here and taking things that belong to the people who were here before. And there's this kind of quiet corruption, I think, that happens in a lot of New Mexico now. In the Hispano, we call ourselves Hispano here. They call themselves Spanish for so long. Who got screwed over by the United States in a lot of ways. You're promised all of this stuff that you can keep your land and keep your language, and on the other hand, it doesn't happen. And so there becomes this quiet, like, we're going to work the system here. If the system is going to take off all our stuff, then we're going to take the state jobs and just not do anything.